Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Green Scare Pod. So today we're joined by Jake Conroy. Jake was involved with SHAC, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, as well as the anti-whaling group Ocean Defense International, and now has a YouTube channel named The Cranky Vegan, where he provides much-needed critiques of the animal rights movement. He also has a series called My Friends Do the Coolest Shit, which is basically a much better version of what I'm doing. So thank you so much for joining me, Jake.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, so first off, how do you feel about being one of the people to popularize Darude Sandstorm?
I think Darude probably popularized Sandstorm, but within the animal rights movement, making Darude a household staple in the early 2000s, probably one of the higher accomplishments on my list for sure.
Oh, I'll have to agree there. Um, so, because you do the same thing I do, you know what the boring old first question is going to be. How did you get involved in veganism and animal rights? And $10 says punk rock is going to be involved in the answer.
I can answer without saying punk rock, although it wouldn't be entirely factual. No, I think I got involved. I mean, I have a very long answer to this. I tend to ramble, so listener beware. But I will try to keep it short. But I got involved in politics and activism essentially through music. But it didn't start with punk rock for me. It started with hip hop.
Hmm.
So, in elementary school in the mid 80s, I was really interested in Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement. And, I grew up in white suburbia in Connecticut where, reading about the civil rights movement at that age was Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and there's no other history really being told. And in the mid 80s, I was fifth grade, sixth grade. I started listening to hip hop and eventually started listening to things like Public Enemy and Fear of a Black Planet. The album by Public Enemy came out and it like totally changed my thinking about politics and the civil rights movement at a pretty early age. But like they were singing things about Black Power and the Black Panther Party and Malcolm X and I'm thinking, who are all these people and what are these organizations? And I started kind of diving into more that way. And I read about and learned about a whole nother world of activism that wasn't, a Martin Luther King or a Rosa Parks. Not that they were necessarily, negative things. They were great, but there was this whole other world of radicalism and liberation and Black Power and all this stuff that I didn't learn about in white suburbia. Probably for a very good reason because I lived in white suburbia. Um, and so that really kind of opened my eyes to like what struggle means and what struggle looks like, and what how there's a lot of different roads to making change, and we kind of really need to go down all of them. And then when I became a teenager, I really got into this thing called punk rock. You may have heard of it before. I got into hardcore, in hardcore punk rock music in the mid 90s. That was it, man. That was, early 90s, mid 90s. It was straight edge vegan hardcore and it was radical and it was militant and there was bands saying things that no one had said before. And all of a sudden it was okay not just to be vegan, but also to be angry about it and to express your anger and really like loud ways, direct ways. And that was very appealing to that generation. And it created a lot of not just vegans, but it created a lot of people that were angry animal rights activists that turned that rage into action. Um, and eventually that led me to, being vegan and getting involved in animal rights activism and other forms of activism. But really, yeah, it started a lot with what I would consider to be art.
Yeah. I think I can relate to some things there. Like when I was a teenager, I went to a majority white school, and we weren't. It was an international school in another country, actually. And because we didn't talk much about the real dirty history of the United States, I really latched on to civil rights and Black Power ideas when I was a teenager. Even though I'm not black, and leftist ideas in general, and became very motivated by that, and got into hip hop music as well. So I can totally relate with the connection there. And I think that definitely my veganism was influenced by some punk rock bands like Propagandhi. And since I went
Sure.
vegan, I've been listening to vegan straight edge bands like Raid, Earth Crisis, that kind. So
Yeah. What was the hip hop that you listened to that you felt maybe be like triggered a little bit something inside of you?
Tupac.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you were perhaps best known for your involvement with SHAC, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, and you were one of the 6 people prosecuted on charges of animal enterprise terrorism. So, how did you get involved with SHAC, and what did you do for the movement?
For the SHAC campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got involved in the SHAC campaign in about 2000. Is I got to see some undercover footage from inside the laboratories. That at the time, this was before the internet, really. So you couldn't go on YouTube and you couldn't go on Google and you couldn't look all these things up and watch these videos. These were things that you had to have sent to you from other parts of the world on VHS cassette tape. And so in 1997, I saw the undercover footage that came out of Huntington Life Sciences in New Jersey and in England, and it was horrifying. And that just kind of continued to reignite that spark against vivisection. The things on these undercover footage, on the undercover footage, was just horrifying. And over that time, I saw the people in England doing these pressure campaigns against Consort Beagle Breeder and against Hillgrove Cat Farm and against Regal Rabbits, Shamrock Primate Farm. And they're shutting all these places down. I was very inspired by that, and I wanted to see more of that in the United States, and that's why I helped start pressure campaigning in my local, within my local organization in Seattle, and we had, some wins there. And so when those people that did those original beagle breeder campaigns and cat farm campaigns started SHAC to shut down Huntington Life Sciences, I was very enthusiastic about it, and as were my friends. And so people throughout the country were doing their part to put pressure on the laboratory and their financial backings in the United States to help the campaign in England, which is pretty unusual back then because it was, as I said, there wasn't a lot of, the World Wide Web didn't really exist the way that it does today. So to be part of an international movement felt, I think, for me anyways, felt very special because it was something that like we organized regionally in the United States, we organized nationally in the United States, but to expand that across around the globe was really cool. And so we all kind of did our part. In Seattle, where I was living at the time, we were doing protests against Stevens Incorporated, which was the largest financial backers at the time of the laboratory. And through a series of twists and turns, the campaign focus really shifted from England to the United States, and there was a need for an actual structured organization in the United States. And I was asked to come out to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to help start that. And so I flew out there with the expectation of being there for a few months and ended up staying for 5.5 years. And I knew a couple of the people that were helping, and they asked me to come. And so I just showed up and met the other people. And I dove into a lot of different things, but I spent a lot of time doing design. I was the person that knew how to design a newsletter or design a poster or a flyer or make a video, how to design these new things called web pages. And so that was a lot of what I did. I did a lot of organizing and activism as well, but I primarily focused on the design pieces.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, what would you say was the strength of the SHAC movement, and why were you guys so effective?
I think there was two kind of pieces that I think were really made the SHAC campaign successful. Two broad pieces. The first one was it used secondary and tertiary targeting to pressure the main target. So the main target was a laboratory called Huntington Life Sciences. And the secondary and tertiary targeting simply means you target corporations and individuals and decision makers that the laboratory needs to stay open, but those corporations and decision makers don't need the laboratory to stay open. What that means is like you go after their banking facilities. Every corporation needs a bank by law. Every corporation needs insurance in order to operate by law. They need auditors. They need internet providers. They need clients. They need all sorts of things. And if you can put pressure on those companies to drop Huntington Life Sciences as a target, you can put a really big dent in their ability to operate. A bank might have 10,000 accounts open, right? And we are just saying, we want you to close just one. And if we put enough pressure on you, we will convince you to close that one account. Because at the end of the day, having 9,999 accounts as opposed to 10,000 isn't a huge deal to a bank. But for a laboratory who only has one bank account and needs it by law to stay open, if they lose that bank account, they're in a lot of trouble. And so the beauty of the SHAC campaign was that it utilized that secondary and tertiary targeting in really, really big ways. And we were able to get over 100 of the largest corporations in the world to abandon the laboratory. All the world's banks, all the insurance companies, all the big five auditing corporations. We got the laboratory kicked off the New York Stock Exchange. We got them kicked off the over-the-counter bulletin board, which is the stock exchange below the New York Stock Exchange. We got them relegated to the pink sheets, which are penny stocks. So we took one of the world's largest laboratories of its kind that was selling a share for $30 or $40, and we decimated it to where they were selling it for 2 or 3 pennies a share. And that was because we did that through that particular type of pressure campaigning. It worked, and this is the second piece, because as an organization, we operated very horizontally and non-hierarchically, meaning we didn't have leaders within the organization that went around to everyone and said, you have to do this, and you have to do this, you can't do that, or you can't do this. We said, here's our blueprint on how we think we can shut down this laboratory as quickly as possible, but maybe you have other ideas. Here are the tactics that we would use personally to shut down or pressure our targets, but maybe you have an idea of a different type of tactic that you want to use. We did protests, we did rallies, sometimes civil disobedience, we did brand jamming and public shaming, but other people did, home demonstrations. Some people did office disruption. Some people did underground activity like, liberating animals or smashing windows or painting buildings. All of these pieces were welcome. Didn't necessarily mean that we as an organization were organizing them or supporting them financially or participating in them, but we supported the ideology of underground direct action as long as there was no violence being used against any animal, human or otherwise. And so that allowed people to engage in a wide range of activism. And when you let people do what they want, there's accountability to that, right? And so people felt accountable. Like, I want to shut this place down. Here's the things that I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that they happen. It wasn't like, I want to shut this place down and here's this big organization that's going to help me do, or that's doing it and I'll see how I can help. It is individuals taking part in a grassroots, no nonsense, militant campaign to end a laboratory. And at the same time, put a really big dent in capitalism, put a really big dent in the vivisection industry, and send a very clear message that, like, we have the skills and the tactics and the strategies to change things in a really big way in a meaningful timeline. And so I think, like, when you put those things together, secondary and tertiary targeting under the banner of pressure campaigning with smart strategies, with a wide range of people using a wide range of legal and illegal tactics, that's what made the SHAC campaign so special. And that's what made the SHAC campaign so successful. And I think ultimately you can tell the success of it by how much it scared the living shit out of the people we were protesting against.
Yeah, and the fact that they went after you and the other SHAC-7 as the leaders, it really shows that they don't understand anarchism at all. The authorities,
Yeah.
they just don't understand the lack of hierarchy because their entire existence is predicated on it. So, who was part of SHAC? You were willing to work with a huge bunch of other individuals, including people from other movements and who weren't necessarily vegan or vegetarian as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the SHAC organization, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty USA, was 3 or 4 of us that, lived in a house together, which was also our office. And we worked on what we thought was the best ways to move the campaign forward. And we did that, 15, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for 5.5 years. But SHAC was a movement the anti-Huntington life sciences movement, was anyone. Anyone could participate. It was the idea that if you want to close this place down, then do it. Then you can participate. And we didn't care if you were vegan or a vegetarian or an omnivore. If you wanted to see this place closed down, then join us. And I think that's an important philosophy and strategy that we should be utilizing more in the animal rights movement, in that we are more of a open tent, a broader tent type of movement, because there are a lot of people that care about animals. They might not care about animals in the way we as vegan animal rights activists want them to, but they care about animals one way or another. And if our job is to, in part, to get as many people on our side, and in this case, it would be to be vegan, then it seems that we should utilize a strategy that brings people in, meet them where they're at politically, and then try to bring them up to speed on the issues, as opposed to saying you can't care about anything animal otherwise until you are at this level that we insist that you must be, which is a vegan. I think that is extremely detrimental. And we can see things from other movements and ours as well, and we can use SHAC as an example of how it works. You do a pressure campaign, and in this case, it was against animal testing, which sometimes is a hard sell for the general public. But we utilized, people's feelings about dogs and cats in order to draw them into the campaign. So we pushed a lot of, there's dogs in cages, there's puppies in cages, there's kittens in cages, and there were. And they were the ones that, you mostly saw being abused in the undercover footage. But there were also mice and rats and rabbits and pigs and horses and birds and lizards and everything else that they were experimenting on. But we could draw people into the campaign because they saw those puppies in the cages, and they saw the puppy being punched in the face, close-fisted by a vivisector, and they were outraged. And then you can have that conversation. Oh, the pig or the dog in the cage is the same as the chicken in the cage. The kitten is the same as the mink on the fur farm. And people can start to make those connections. But they were able to make those connections at their speed. And at the same time be an activist for animals, in this case trying to shut down a laboratory. And what we saw was that our numbers were much bigger. We'd have hundreds and hundreds of people show up in the United Kingdom. They'd have thousands and thousands of people show up to their marches. We had all sorts of people show up and participate, and they weren't necessarily vegan and they weren't necessarily vegetarian, but a lot of them became vegan and vegetarian. I still have people come up to me 20 years later and be like, man, I went vegan because of the SHAC campaign. I went out to a demonstration and I was like, oh, this makes sense to me now. And I went vegan, and they're still vegan. It's a bit anecdotal, but I do think that that is a great way to make change for animals. You do pressure campaigns against strategic targets, and you do and you incorporate your vegan outreach into that pressure campaign.
Yeah, I think that I think that's a great point, and also I think that if the animal rights movement wants to take itself seriously, I think we should ditch the whole idea of being a vegan movement, because it's not about us or our diets; it's about the animals. And our diets may have something to do with that and contribute to that, but I'm not a fan of calling it the vegan movement, because it also just dilutes the message about what it's about. Like, I don't think that the rise in interest in plant-based eating has had anything to do with a rise in interest or, a rise in action regarding animal rights.
Well, I
Um,
think I think where we've lost our way is that we have confused plant-based eating with veganism. Veganism is a
yeah.
liberation struggle based on the philosophy of ending the use of animals in society, allowing animals to live the life that they deserve to live. We have, as a movement, have watered that down into such a welfarist message, that veganism is now a plant-based diet. That's you do every once in a while. But it's not. It's a liberation struggle. So I'm not opposed to calling it a vegan movement if we are adhering to the definition of what veganism
Mhm.
actually is. I always say this, and no one likes it, but you can You can dress up a turd, but it's still a turd. And so you can call vegan something, you can call veganism something else because people always do this. We should rebrand as something else. But you still have the same people in the movement that are still going to
Right.
wreck
Yeah.
the definition of whatever you come up with next, and just water down the message again. Instead, what we need to be doing, in my opinion, is really reminding people what veganism actually is and building our organizations and our outreach and our campaigns around the actual messaging of veganism and get rid of this label of plant-based dieting and get rid of this idea that like animal rights is a movement for everyone and having right-wing people and fascist people and super problematic people being part of what is actually a social justice movement, a
Mhm.
liberation struggle.
Well, let me ask you this. So I've heard you say in some of your talks that you refuse to work with fascists during SHAC, which I, of course, completely applaud. My question is, what do you think of the Zionists who defend what's happening to Palestinians right now, in Gaza? Because we haven't had a great track record of people in the animal rights movement speaking speaking sensibly about what's going on in Israel, Palestine either. Like Gary Yourofsky comes to mind. Do these people have any place in our movement?
I think people have an opportunity should have an opportunity to have their own opinions, but also have an opportunity to change those opinions. I think that we need to give, as I said earlier, I think we need to give people the opportunity to meet them where they're at. I think that the animal rights movement is full of a lot of people that don't fully understand the idea of what a liberation struggle is, and I think that's because our movement is predominantly middle and upper class, and our movement is predominantly white, and I think that is probably because um, we are made up of a movement of people that don't have any other issues that necessarily hinder their lives in the way that people of color deal with, or the LGBTQ community deal with, people that are suffering from colonization deal with, So I'm happy that people that are in that place of privilege recognize that others still are yearning to be free, in this case, non-human animals, and they fight for that. But I also think there needs to be an understanding of what oppression looks like beyond non-human animals. And I think that's something that we lose in our movement. And so I think, you see a lot of people that are like, why do we care about the Palestinians when this many animals are being killed in a slaughterhouse? Or why should I care about Russia invading Ukraine because or why should I care about the Congo or Sudan when this many animals are being killed in a slaughterhouse? And that comes from like a very elevated position of privilege, right? To be like, this is the only thing that's going on in the world that matters. I do think the animal rights movement should be a movement for animals. I don't think we should necessarily be a movement that is like about every possible, social justice issue. But I also think that the animal rights movement needs to understand the idea of collective liberation, intersectionality, and the idea of and importance of building bridges with other movements and understanding their struggles and respecting them. So that's to say that yes, we are an animal rights movement, and we fight for animals, and that's what we do. But as a movement, we also understand all the other struggles against, racism and inequality and homophobia and transphobia and colonization and imperialism and all these different isms. And we can speak on them and we support the fight against those things. And I think when we don't do that, we continue to relegate ourselves to the sidelines as a marginalized, not marginalized, but like a movement that essentially is like the redheaded stepchild, right? No one wants to deal with with the animal rights movement. We are on the fringe of the fringe because essentially that's where we've placed ourselves by being a movement with very little understanding of social justice.
Yeah, I can agree there, especially because a lot of people out there who believe in veganism or animal rights but want to push for it don't understand what it has to do with things like capitalism and industrialization and whatnot, and believe it can just be solved through neoliberalism and the free market and lab-grown meat, and that's never going to work.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we are pushed, at least in the United States, right? Like that's how change is made and that's how things are going to
Right.
change. And that's how it is pushed on us. And so, I understand why people think that way.
Mm.
But I also think it's important that we push back against that narrative and we understand the alternatives and the actual ways to make social change as opposed to just taking these prescribed theories of change that have been passed on to us by government or by corporations or large NGOs that say this is the way you make change and this is how it's going to happen, and we all just kind of fall in line with it. I think the pushing back and the questioning and rethinking is difficult, but I think that's ultimately where we start to make real change.
So, what do you think is the most effective and sustainable type of activism for us to engage in?
I think tactically there isn't something that we definitely should be doing or definitely shouldn't be doing. What we need to be doing is have a better understanding of what a tactic is and
Mm.
understanding that they are constantly shifting and changing. The problem with the animal rights movement is that we've picked a tactic. We've convinced everyone it's actually a strategy, and we've convinced everyone
Mm.
that that is the only way that we are going to ever change anything. In this case, in the animal rights movement, vegan outreach is a tactic. Education is a tactic. We've convinced everyone it's a strategy and a sole strategy that if we just make this many vegans, we will affect this much of the demand, and animal agriculture and animal use will just fall apart. That's just not the way things happen. It's not for a variety of reasons. So, what I personally think, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but where I've seen the most change, if not all change, has come through the idea of pressure campaigning. Not just in the animal rights movement, but every social justice movement has won the things that they've won through pressure campaigning, including in the animal rights movement. Everything we've won is a pressure campaign. You know, but understanding the difference between a strategy and tactic, I think, is really important. I personally think, and talk about it like a puzzle. The big picture, the puzzle, the finished puzzle is the thing you want to win, whatever it's going to be. The individual puzzle pieces are the tactics, and how you're going to put those puzzle pieces together is the strategy. So if we just show up with one puzzle piece, whether it's vegan outreach or ALF activity or civil disobedience or legislation, if we just have one puzzle piece, we can't put the puzzle together, no matter how good you are, how good you are at utilizing that tactic. You have to put all the pieces together to win. And you're not going to need all those. Every puzzle piece isn't always going to be the same. You're not always going to need every puzzle piece. And being like fluid in that sense is really important, right? So if you put together a campaign, a pressure campaign to get, a laboratory to close, you're not going to use the same tactics for a pressure campaign that you're going to utilize to pass a law or to get more vegan food in your school cafeteria. Um, but understanding that we need a variety of tactics and a variety of different circumstances, and using a variety of strategies to win, I think is the thing that we generally fail at in the grassroots animal rights movement. But when we understand it, we do really, really cool things with it.
Mm. Well, let me ask you, don't pressure campaigns just seem like we're delaying a system or something that's going to realize itself eventually? I mean, that's what happened with Huntingdon Life Sciences.
Not necessarily, right?
Okay.
I think it's a big discussion, but I think if we look at all the things that pressure campaigns have changed globally, we see the fur industry in an absolute
Mm,
collapse.
good example, yeah.
You see here in the United States, you see fur stores and designers abandoning fur like crazy because of pressure campaigning. You're seeing bans on production, bans on sales, bans on farming all around the world. Um, because of pressure campaigning. Um, And you're seeing a direct result of that is that fur farms are closing, at least in the United States, drastically. The
Mm,
price per pelt is dropping drastically. The fur industry is dying, and that is a direct result because of grassroots, predominantly grassroots pressure campaigning. Does the government bail out some of those industries? No, I don't think so. I think they occasionally bail out farmers and they give that
mm,
money. They give payouts sometimes to farmers. Oftentimes those payouts take years and years and years. Sometimes those payouts never come. I think there's one instance in the last 30 or 40 years where one farmer took some of that money and opened a fur farm in another country, which sucks. But that fur farmer will be on the run there too, right? Like they're trying to ban fur farming across the EU.
mm,
And so like take your money and open a farm, just, pick up your whole family and move to a different country to do a fur farm doesn't sound like a very reasonable option for most people. We see pressure campaigns getting rid of circuses. Really smart pressure campaigning was used to get rid of Ringling Brothers and Barnum Bailey Circus in the United States, like a
mm,
125-year circus, disappeared almost overnight because of pressure campaigning. A smart strategic pressure campaign utilizing the bullhook bans to get rid of bringing elephants to cities in the circus. Super smart. Um, Not bailed out. What we do see, probably the biggest amount of bailout, it comes through subsidies, and the form of bailouts in case of like emergency situations, right? So we see um, things like during the coronavirus, we saw Trump give out something like $32 billion in subsidies to agriculture in the United States. That
mm,
was because the demand, or excuse me, the supply could not keep up with the demand, right? Everything had to shift. All the farmers that were packaging and growing for restaurants and wholesale couldn't switch their operations to then go into retail. And so the government had to bail a lot of that out. You see it now with dairy industry, right? Dairy industry losing money drastically, and they get bailed out. They
mm,
are losing that money because people are more interested in drinking fizzy waters and sodas and sports drinks, according to the data. People are interested, obviously, in milk alternatives as well. But all that's being bailed out. They're literally dumping millions of tons of dairy just out the back of their trucks into fields. They have literal caves filled with literal cheese that can't be sold, and the government buys it all. So when you think about like governments bailing out the those that are affected by pressure campaigns, the reality is if vegan outreach was ever big enough to actually affect the demand, which we have really not ever seen in 30 plus years of us doing this, that is the place where it would be bailed out. If the price, if the sales of cheese dropped anymore, or if the sales of hamburgers dropped out more than it already is, the subsidies that subsidize the prices, there would also be bailouts that would keep these farmers alive. I mean, it's you just got to look at the history of bailouts and subsidies and farming going back to like what the Dust Bowl in the 20s of how banks and governments try to buy out farms and take the farms and turn them into these giant conglomerates. And I think like the idea that like government will not bail out any sort of demand issue that comes from vegan outreach is absolutely ridiculous and unfounded. But I think there's a large majority of pressure campaigning that has won, that indicates that government will not bail out these industries.
mm. I was talking about bailing out the industries, not the individuals, because of
Sure.
course that's what matters for the animals. So, Jake, what was prison like for you? And do you think that too many activists underplay the reality of prison, especially for minorities or LGBTQ plus people?
Prison is great. No, yeah, prison, I mean, that's a huge question, right? How was prison? Prison was awful. It's an awful
Yeah,
experience. And I think, we hear a lot of people, not a lot, but some people in the animal rights movement that are like, don't worry about prison, or it's
that's
a
why I ask. Yeah.
short walk to the salad bar was the famous quote that I loved. Everyone everyone's experience is going to be different. I think that there's 50 states, and every state has its own prison system, and then you have a federal system. Within those systems, they all have different security levels from, minimum to camps and lows, mediums, highs, super maxes, solitary confinements. Every person that goes to prison, whether it's for activism or not, is going to have a different experience. But ultimately, we all are experiencing the same thing, which is the government is trying to disappear you. They're trying to get you,
Mm,
they're trying to break you. They're trying to get you to the point where you will not engage in whatever behavior you were engaging in previously. And they do a pretty good job of it. I mean, if you look at just in the animal rights movement, all the people that have gone to jail, particularly for or prison rather, for direct action stuff, most of them really aren't that involved anymore. I would say a large majority of them aren't involved anymore. And that's not like a slight on those people.
of course not.
But
Yeah.
it is an indication that maybe that works to a certain degree,
Mm.
um, which is unsettling.
And huge respect to you and well, almost all of my guests for still being involved with activism after having gone to prison. By the way.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Um, so I think that I don't talk I talk about prison a lot.
Mm.
Partly because I think it's mildly fascinating, and a lot of people don't really know what it's actually like, and I'm happy to talk about it because I think it's important to talk about it. But I think it's important for activists to share their experience with other activists because there is a reality of going to prison. It can be very dangerous. In my situation, it was very dangerous. It was
Mm.
scary. There was race riots and gang warfare and people getting stabbed and hit over the head with padlocks on the end of belts, and that's not like something you just like walk away from or you can just ignore. Like it's like your friend is getting their face rearranged to the point where you can't recognize them anymore. And if that's something that's like not a big deal, just a short walk to the salad bar, I think we're doing a real disservice to the people that are actually out there taking the risks
Mm.
as activists. But on the flip side, that's not to say you shouldn't take those risks. I think you absolutely should. But I think you should do them with the most information that you can. We see a lot of people. There was like a kind of a period in the movement maybe 5 years ago or so, like that was the badge of honor. Like let's go out and ta occupy this farm, or
Mm.
let's run in and do these open rescues,
The
and
open
let's
rescue movement. Yeah. Yeah.
do this illegal thing and that illegal thing. And like if that's your decision to make, that's fine. Like I respect it. But a lot of the people, particularly when it was like a mass thing with like 50 people running, 60 people,
Mm.
and afterwards, they were not briefed on like beforehand, they were not briefed on like what could happen or what could happen if they went to jail or what the outcomes were. It was like, oh, you're just going to get a ticket and you'll be released, no big deal. But then all of a sudden, 50 people have a court date and they're all being charged with multiple misdemeanors. Some are being charged with felonies, and people felt really ill-informed and uninformed as to what all the possible outcomes were. So I'm not here to say what you should and shouldn't do. I'm not here to say you shouldn't take risks. I'm just saying have the most information that you possibly can before you take the risk, so you understand all the possible outcomes. I think it's important to understand the difference between taking a risk, or being risky and being reckless. And I think that's
Mm.
something we don't think a lot about in the animal rights movement. It's a badge of honor to go to jail. It's a badge of honor to get arrested. Everyone should be doing it. Well, no, because everyone has different lives and different experiences, and prison's going to be different, or jail is going to be different. Even if you go for a couple hours, it's going to be different for everyone. If you've never been in a county jail for 10 hours or 8 hours while they're processing you, it's a scary place. You're locked in a tank with people that are having mental health issues or coming off of drugs, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're just locked in a room with them for a day, or 2 days or a week or a month. So I think it's important to understand the difference between being risky and reckless. I think also as an organizer, if you're organizing something like this, you understand that those navigating the legal system is going to be different for everyone. As a middle class white man, straight white man, my experience is going to be totally different than, a black trans woman, um, because of the racist and transphobic and homophobic nature of the prison industrial complex, and the legal system. And if we don't take that into account when we organize these type of actions, I think again we're doing a really big disservice not just to the movement but to our community and the people that make up our community. And we put people in really dangerous situations. So, all that to say, that's why I talk about it. I think it's important we know as much as we can so that we can make the most informed decisions that we can when we engage in risky behavior.
Yeah.
I see both sides of it. Like I do think that like, if the idea is to build mass mobilization, if the idea is to build community, and make that community as big as possible, like you want to make it exciting for people. Like I say this a lot about burnout too, right? Like if you don't want to burn out, like incorporate some fun into your life and into your activism. And if people like wearing shirts and they like eating the vegan food and they like the sweets and and that kind of culture part of it, I'm okay with it. Like it's like yes, but also like you have to include the other pieces in it as well. It's kind
Mm.
of like the flip of what we were talking about earlier, but I like there has to be a way for everyone to participate in your community in your movement. And if the only thing people can do is wear a t-shirt, then let's give them an opportunity to wear a t-shirt. If all they can do is write a letter, then let's give them opportunities to write letters. A lot of times when we look at campaigns, especially grassroots ones, it's like what you see is protests, you see people in bullhorns, you see people doing disruptions, you see, aggravated engagement with people. And all those things I think are really important. But you also need, if you want to build your movement and build your organization and your community, you have to give for something to do for everyone. And so that means like recognizing that people can only write letters, or maybe they're really great at baking and they want to do bake sales and raise money for you. Maybe they're really great at writing or putting together web pages or editing videos. Like we need to make room for everyone. And like what we said in Shack was like you should be able to like draw a line in the sand of what you are like comfortable doing and then take one step past that line.
Mm.
And so it's like if you are only into letter writing, you don't feel comfortable doing anything else, try organizing a letter writing. If you like going to protests or organizing a letter writing night or event. If you like going to protests but you don't like to speak out, try speaking out. Try going on a bullhorn. If like take that next step. But if we don't provide an opportunity for those people to take that next step, then I think we end up holding people back. I do think that like there, particularly in the online social media world, there is a lot of danger in that too as well. I think like we want to build community. For the last bunch of years, it feels like the animal rights movement has been trying to build community online,
Mm.
and online only. And so that means like counting up likes and counting up hearts and how many followers does this person have and using those metrics to determine someone's worth. You see this, maybe not so much anymore, but several years ago when it was like people we saw at the head of the movement were influencers. You had people that were like James Aspie and Joey Carbstrong and Earthling Ed, all these people that didn't have any experience really organizing, didn't have any experience as an activist, and didn't really have any theory of change on how to make change. What are the strategies? What attack? They didn't have any of that, but they all had the ability to um, market themselves,
Mm.
right? And get a lot of likes. And you still see that in YouTube culture, right? Like the people with the most followers are the people that must have something important to say, or they something strategic to say, when really they're just online woofing a bunch of garbage. And so we fell down this rabbit hole of like, let's follow these people.
Mm.
They must be leaders. And then once we've elevated them to this level of like leader, they become untouchable. They're on these pedestals that people, once you disagree with them, block. Once you speak up against them, block. They suppress any sort of discussion or any sort of debate or any sort of disagreement, and that's really dangerous. right? I mean, we're seeing that now, right? Of governments, including the United States, trying to suppress dissent, suppress debate, suppress discussion, because my way is the right way, and any other discussion to suggest otherwise is anti whatever, anti-democracy, anti-vegan, anti-animal rights. I get that a lot. You're not
Mm.
vegan. You're a shill for the animal agriculture industry. You are
People
the
say that?
Oh yeah, constantly.
Wow.
You're no better than the FBI. These are all animal rights activists that tell me that, right? Because I dare to say, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe this is a bad idea. Show me how it works. Show me how this has worked in the past. And no one can answer those questions. So instead, they just say, you're not vegan. You're not this. You're not that. And whatever. I don't really care. I think it's kind of funny. But we've removed the opportunity for debate and discussion and disagreement. And I think that's really dangerous. And I think that's in large part to social media and influencer culture that has seeped into the animal rights movement. You see even people that aren't necessarily trying to be that, but might be a head of an organization or the spokesperson for an organization, and they get sucked into this like, oh, you're an influencer. You're this. You're like, no, I just work for an organization, right?
Mm.
Um, you can look at a variety of mid-level like grassroots organizations that all of a sudden these people that are just trying to organize all of a sudden are trying to be made people are trying to make them into like leader like influencers and things like that, and sometimes they get sucked into it.
Yeah.
Um and I think that like some of those folks have come out on the other end. Like I don't really agree with Joey Carbstrong, but at least he's like he's moved on past like I'm an influencer into like I'm trying to organize something.
Yeah.
um Earthling Ed also someone I don't agree with, but I do think that like he's gone from that like influencer status into like how can I pivot my influencer status into something bigger, and in his case opening sanctuaries and restaurants and writing books. Again, not my cup of tea, but if that's what feels important to him, it feels like he's transitioned into something different. But you see other people like James Aspie, who's like, fuck it, I'm just in it for the money. Where's the
Yeah.
money?
Yeah.
Give me money. And then when he doesn't get the money, he disappears. And then when he needs money again, he comes back and everyone feeds into it. And that is the downside of kind of this social media space that we're in as a movement.
Well, I don't want to speculate too much about it, but one thing I can say is that, when Cosmic Skeptic left veganism, which, he may have done for whatever reasons, I do want to note that around that time, he expressed he was feeling really suffocated being viewed as some kind of vegan advocate or animal rights advocate when that wasn't something that he was actually, willing to live up to. He just took on a philosophical position publicly on his YouTube channel. So I don't even think it's really good I don't think it's sustainable for activists themselves to, gain this image if it's not something that they're actually, doing something about.
Right. I mean, you end up as kind of in the social media space, you're constantly like chasing the algorithm. You have to feed the algorithm,
Mm,
otherwise it dings you. You constantly have to create content, and maybe you just don't have content. Maybe you took a week off. Maybe you went on vacation. All these things which are legitimate. And then when you don't have anything to post, and all of a sudden, like,
right.
the algorithm dings you for it. So it's
And
like
you
this.
can't get Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro on your show if you're doing all the vegan speeches, can you? So,
You cannot. So, you chase that clout, you chase that influence, and you chase the algorithm. And I think ultimately that like
mm,
that is what ends up, hindering the activism. You look at all those people,
right.
James Aspie, Joey Carbstrong, Earthling It, their whole thing is like when they need views, in my opinion, when they need views, they go do these like man on the street interviews, let's debate.
Mm,
And it's like, who does that benefit? It benefits absolutely no one. In fact, I would argue it hinders the animal rights movement, but it gets a shitload of views because vegans want to see other vegans dunk on people that aren't vegan. But it
right.
perpetuates that culture that we talked about prior about always putting down anyone and everyone that isn't vegan, and it also props up that influencer status and influencer culture that also is really toxic to the movement. So we're kind of in a weird spot, I think.
Yeah.
We see a lot of that, but we also see some really cool grassroots organizing that's going on, around the world. that's doing it, I think, in a really smart way with smart strategy, smart tactics, and they're doing a lot of face-to-face organizing, which I think is what we are lacking desperately in this movement. Meeting people face to face, having these, um, opportunities for everyone to come together. I think of like animal activist mentorship. They do these like 10-day convergences where like, all right, everyone come to this city. Let's
There's
help
one going on right now in Austin, I think.
in Austin, yeah.
Yeah.
And Austin also like amazing. They are doing the same things, pressure campaigns against
Hmm.
foie gras
Foie
industry.
gras, yeah.
They're taking out every foie gras restaurant left and right. It's incredible.
Hmm.
Um, and so you have these opportunities to let's go to Austin for a few days or the full 10 days. And I'm going to meet people that have the same feelings and opinions as me. And we can discuss and debate and disagree. I did a talk at a couple of the AAM convergences, and not everyone agrees with me, which is great. That's what I
Hmm.
want. Like, let's have a discussion about it. Why do we disagree? How could we use our disagreements to make things better? And more strategic. And like you can't do that on social media because you're just gonna be like, fuck you and no, fuck you, and then I'm blocking you and all this shit. And it's like, oh, meet me face to face and let's have a conversation. Like we're two humans in this world. Like we should be able to communicate. And so I think that's the flip side of all of this is like you do have people that are out trying to make something really cool happen, and I think for the most part they're pulling it off. So that gives me hope for things to come and a push away from like social media and online culture that permeates
Well, that's
society.
good. And yeah, props to anyone who's taking it more seriously. All right. So now we have a viewer question from Philip. Thank you for submitting the viewer question. So, animal agriculture has a devastating impact on the climate, the planet, our communities, and our health. How can we effectively wield our collective power to regain a rational and clear path towards a prosperous future for the planet, humanity, and all Earthlings?
Great question, Philip. I think just what we talked about the last hour. I think if we really want to have a better path towards a prosperous future, then we need to include everyone in it, right? We need to think more strategically about how we make social change. We have to learn how to take care of ourselves as individuals and as a community to make sure that we have longevity in our activism. And we have to understand and the need for and learn how to build bridges with other movements. No movement is going to win by itself. No movement has one by itself. And when you look at all these older movements that we talk about and look up to, like the civil rights movement, those were all done by uniting and bringing together all sorts of different movements from different walks of life from all around the world. And ultimately, that's how they won the things that they won. And that's something that I think we do see quite a bit of that in social justice spaces, a lot of movements working together. We don't see a lot of that in the animal rights movement. But I think that that's an uphill battle, but I think it's one that we need to initiate and work on. And I think when we do those three things, that's when I think we will have the opportunity to be our most successful self.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jake. It was really good to talk to you. We learned about a whole bunch of stuff, ranging from SHAC to the other things you talked about. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.